and a very warm welcome to all of you on the concluding day of our Indology Festival titled Wanderers and Witnesses Travelers' Tales of India. To travel is to discover that everyone is wrong about other countries, said Aldous Huxley. As we are gathered here today, Huxley's words invite us to reflect upon not only the narratives of all the travelers whom we encountered over the past few days, but the essentially fluid and flawed nature of perception itself. Through the course of the past 5 days and 10 lectures, we traced the footsteps of many of the important explorers, pilgrims, traders, and scholars who visited our subcontinent, leaving behind lasting narratives. We dwelt upon the scientific inquisitiveness of Biruni, the sacred pilgrimage of Xuanzang, the commercial curiosity of Marco Polo, and the vivid chronicles of Ibn Battuta. We also tried to understand how Tavernier, Bernier, the Danes of Tranquebar, or Afanasi Nikitin perceived India through the lens of their own time, purpose, and cultural framework. Today, we turn our attention to the travels and travelogues of the English. This is a very wide historic arc. Starting with the early tentative narratives of the explorers and the diplomats who came, we come down right to the authoritative voices of the colonial officials, the women, artists, and others who accompanied them. Whether it is the diary entries of Thomas Roe, or the sketches of Emily Eden, or the vivacious accounts of Fanny Parks, these narratives actually give us a wide range of reactions, from deep admiration to imperial critique, to ethnocentric curiosity, to aesthetic delight. These narratives not only describe India, they also tell us a lot about these travelers. The blind spots, fascinations, assumptions, and shortcomings of these travelers. Today, on the last day of our seminar, as we engage critically with the narrations of these English travelers, let us also remember that these narrations are by no means a final truth. Not at all. They are merely layered encounters between people of different worldviews, which were very, very different in those times and are perhaps very, very different even today. Before we commence today's journey, let me give you a brief introduction about Tamil Heritage Trust, which is our organization, especially for the benefit of those who've joined us for the first time today. Tamil Heritage Trust, or Tamil Paramparya Arakattalai, is a voluntary organization started almost 15 years back by a group of like-minded people with the objective of understanding, appreciating, disseminating, and celebrating information related to India's rich history and heritage, not just for the benefit of those who are scholarly and academic minded, but for the benefit of the average enthusiastic public as well. Towards this end, THT conducts various events and programs throughout the year. Chief amongst these are our talks and seminars. Our most important program is our monthly Heritage Talk series conducted on the first Saturday of every month. This is an online talk in English and has been conducted almost uninterrupted for 15 years now. We merely changed the platform from in-person events to online through and post-corona. A 2-day in-person concert conducted in the month of December is called Pechu Kacheri, or Oratory Concert by us. This is meant to coincide and collaborate with the Margari Ishai Kacheris of Chennai. Our most scholarly and erudite event is the Indology Festival, and we are on the concluding day of this festival today. Apart from our talks and seminars from THT, we also conduct various workshops and classroom sessions on and off, where anybody can register and participate. We have one-day workshops called How to See a Temple, How to See a Museum, etc., which are conducted in 2 sessions. In the forenoon session, we have a series of lectures, and in the afternoon, the participants are taken to a practical site where we elucidate upon what was discussed earlier. Our classroom sessions cover a wide range of topics like Pallava Grantham script, ancient Indian astronomy, ancient Indian mathematics, etc. Alamar Avai, another initiative of ours, is targeted at the school teachers of Tamil Nadu. Over a series of weekend lectures, various aspects of Indian history and heritage are covered. The idea being that the teachers will take them back to their students, further spreading awareness. Docent training is a recent initiative of ours where a training is given to people to prepare them as docents to present historical sites and heritage monuments in a professional manner to the enthusiastic audience. Version 2 of this training was completed only earlier this year, where 30 people graduated. We will soon be advertising for version 3 of this initiative. Site Seminar is another initiative of ours, which is an in-house activity, largely meant for our own education and enhancement. We zero in upon a particular site anywhere in India, and our volunteers study it in depth through several weeks. Then we have a number of in-house seminars where this information is shared. And then armed with all this knowledge, we visit the site and experience it in its totality. From Tamil Heritage Trust, we have also instituted 2 awards for individual contributions. The first such award is called THT Professor S. Swaminathan Heritage Award after our founder. And it is given for individual contributions in the field of Indian history and heritage. We will soon be advertising for nominations for this award for the year 2025. The second award that is given by us is called V. Venkaya Epigraphy Award, given for individual contributions in the field of epigraphy. Named after V. Venkaya, who was the first official Indian epigraphist, this award has been instituted by Miss Sunita Madhavan, his great-granddaughter. THT has been entrusted with the responsibility of administering this award. This year, we have already received nominations for this award and are in the process of jury scrutiny right now. We have a YouTube channel where you will find links to all our past talks, right down to today. Please subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to receive notifications of our future events. These are our social media handles. This is our mailing address. You can mail us here to join our mailing list. Also, if you want to join any of our initiatives or programs in a voluntary capacity, you can mail us. We are a voluntary organization. We do not have any dedicated financial backing. So any kind of contributions are welcome and will be appreciated. You may kindly use this QR code or address to contribute generously. That was about Tamil Heritage Trust. As we already mentioned, since one of our speakers had to drop out due to unexpected emergency, we have only one talk scheduled for today. That is English Travelers to India, From Discovery to Dominance by Dr. Pramod K. Nayar. Moving on to the talk. English travelers to India have journeyed for centuries, their accounts providing valuable insights into Indian history and culture. Early travelers like Ralph Fitch and George Milton Hall, primarily merchants seeking trade opportunities, paved the way for later figures like Sir Thomas Roe, an English ambassador who documented his experiences during the Mughal era. Later, travelers like John Fryer and Peter Mundy provided detailed descriptions of life in India during the Mughal period, including aspects of social behavior and living standards. In his talk, Dr. Pramod maps English writings on India from narratives that capture the moment of discovery, the unknown, and the fabulous to the period of dominance via mapping, archivization, and image making. The talk employs both verbal and visual texts from the 16th century to the 19th. A little bit about Dr. Pramod K. Nayar. A professor at the Department of English, University of Hyderabad, where he also holds the UNESCO chair in vulnerability studies. Dr. Pramod K. Nayar is a prolific author and recipient of Visitors Award for Best Research in Arts, Humanities, and the Social Sciences from the Honorable President of India. Sorry, 1 second. An elected Fellow of the Royal Historical Society and a Fellow of the English Association, Nayar's works on the Raj include Indian Travel Writing in the Age of the Empire, 5 volumes, English Writing and India, 1600 to 1920, Colonial Voices, The Raj, A Journey Through 10 Documents, The Great Uprising, The Raj at Leisure, The Trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar, English Siege and Prison Writing, etc., among others. I now invite Dr. Pramod K. Nayar to take over the stage and deliver his talk. A very warm welcome to you, Doctor.
Thank you. Let me first put up my... Are we set? Right, thank you. Thank you, Gauri, for the invitation to speak on this platform. Thanks to all members of the THT for having me over. In what I want to do, clearly, there's no possibility of covering 400 years of writing by the English on India. I'm also fascinated by the title of the series itself, Wanderers and Witnesses, Travelers' Tales. And Gauri pointed out that to travel was to do certain things to acquire knowledge. Travel was originally spelled in English as travail, Travail, which is interesting because to travel was also to suffer. So the word originally from the Latin combined both. But the other part to the word travel was also that you traveled sometimes in error. And you wandered in error because you didn't know the way. Best example of this would be Christopher Columbus, who wanted to go east and therefore went west. To travel in error, to make mistakes, was to fall into what's called error, E-R-R-A-R-E, which meant two things: to make a mistake, but also to wander. That means you wandered by mistake, but you also wandered to correct your mistakes. So etymologically, it's very interesting to think about wanderers, travelers. And of course, there is Tolkien who will tell us that not all who wander are lost. It's interesting to think of how the English traveled to India. And by travel here, I have to qualify what I'm trying to say. The people who traveled through India as tourists, as different from people who traveled and stayed for some time in India. William Jones would be a big example of that. So there are short stay and long stay travelers. There are travelers who came as merchants, as Gauri mentioned, as soldiers, statesmen. From 1813, missionaries and doctors and nurses, a wide variety of people. Men came, women came, men came, and then their women came, sisters and spouses, girlfriends. Many of them widowed in India, stayed. Some joined the army, some joined the nursing profession. We know that many of them kept accounts. In fact, one of my standard lines of joke, a kind of jokey comment is, the British kept so much record. They wrote so much. I am always puzzled that they found time to govern India, because it seemed to me that they were always writing and keeping records. They recorded everything. The British Library in London, I am told, I've worked in the place, but I've never captured the full extent of it, has 18 miles of India material in the India Office records, 18 miles. That's a quantum of material the British produced. Clearly, we are not going to be doing all of that today. But it's important to recognize that one of the most documented empires in the history of humanity is the British Empire. If you, for example, wanted to know weather conditions in Allahabad in the 18th and 19th centuries, you'll find the British having kept records. For example, there was a man who kept records. He measured temperature and pressure every day, 3 times a day, for 3 years, and published a document on this. Now, you will think of him as kind of crazy that somebody measures weather patterns on a daily basis 3 times for several years. but that man also was instrumental in the founding of the Indian meteorological sciences. That's where it begins. Like others like Henry Piddington, who looked at and coined the word cyclones. He kept memoirs of every cyclone that came in the Bay of Bengal for 20 years and then published a handbook. Clearly, there is a lot, sheer wealth of information available in the materials that they put together. I'm going to barely scratch the surface. There are various kinds of materials also. There are travel documents, there are letters, essays, official reports, quasi-memoirs, memoirs. The first major writings from India by the English came in the form of letters, obviously. And the first letter book of the English East India Company is available in 3 volumes. The letters written by what were called factors from Surat back home. That's there. 1579, Father Thomas Stevens's letter is available. It's available in a volume called the First Englishman in India, Courtney Locke's volume, which gives you some of this, the early letters. Gauri's preliminary remarks also refer to people like Thomas Roe and others. Thomas Roe was the official ambassador of the court of King James to the court of Jahangir, 1616. He arrives in India, leaves in 1619. And he has his memoirs that he wrote during that time. His chaplain, Edward Terry, also wrote a memoir, which he published in 1655. So this wealth of documentation, some of it appeared early in print. The Richard Hakluyt's collection, the essays on the navigations of the English nation, appeared in 1595. And then Samuel Purchas published his Pilgrims in 1605 and a later edition in 1625. So the point I want to emphasize is the English readers back in India were already discovering India, not necessarily by traveling, but by the amount of documentation that went back there. For example, in the late 17th century, we know that John Locke had an enormous India collection already. He never came to India, but he had a wealth of material there already from the library that he built up. We know that the travelogues of John Fryer, whom Gauri mentioned, he was a physician and a fellow of the Trinity College, Cambridge. His original text, the original print edition of his book is still there in the Trinity Library. John Fryer's narrative was accepted in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society, as some of you may know, founded in 1666. It has been in, its transactions have been published continuously from 1665. It's still publishing. One of the longest running scholarly journals in history. So the travelers' accounts were accepted. They were read out at the Philosophical Society, at the Royal Society. And we know for a fact that in the 17th century, in the Royal Society, one of the persons who attended to some of those talks was a man called René Descartes, who also therefore was exposed to India. So the point I want to emphasize is when we use the term discovery, discovery is not necessarily by those who physically traveled to India, but by the shall we say, second-hand discovery made by people who consumed the documents that were produced by the wanderers and witnesses. My first instance of the question of discovery, therefore, starts with people who kept accounts. Let me give you an example. This is some of the stuff I'm saying will not be on your slides, so you will have to split your visual and oral between what I'm saying. William Hawkins, who considered himself an ambassador, arrives at the court of Emperor Jahangir. And in his account, Hawkins records something. He says, and I'm quoting, "I reckon the jewelry worn by the Emperor of Hindustan was worth not less than 30 lakh rupees. This is 17th century. 30 lakhs was the quantum of wealth worn by the emperor." And he says, and it does not repeat his jewels. This was the moment of stupendous discovery of the wealth that was India. When they arrive at the court of Jahangir, they are struck by the absolutely ostentatious splendor, but also very clearly the wealth. So the first moment of discovery has to do with variety, profusion, excess, splendor, radically different from anything that they'd ever seen. So the first moment of discovery had to do with India's expanse, its sheer variety, its wealth. They came to, of course, the court of the Mughal emperor. And the Mughal emperor, and this is recorded in Sir Thomas Roe's account, the emperor did not even look in his direction. And Sir Thomas Roe is offended. This, I am the ambassador of the court of King James. So he tries very hard to get the attention of Emperor Jahangir, and Jahangir doesn't give it anything. He doesn't pay attention. And he has to somehow insinuate that he's important. He has to convince people that he's important. He has to bully people that he's important to get a little close to the emperor. So he takes months where he edges his way closer to the emperor and is overawed by what he sees, is Jahangir. And by the way, Sir Thomas Roe thought he was very important, but that he mattered not a hoot is proven by the fact that he doesn't even find a mention in the Jahangir Nama. Jahangir doesn't bother with him. He's just one more, white-skinned person who's in my court. Why I say this? The moment of discovery has traditionally been seen as the Europeans' discovery of the rest of the world. Columbus discovers America. Vasco da Gama discovers a route to India. The very idea of discovery implies the Europeans discovering another part of the world. But as we know, when Columbus discovered America, the Americans didn't care because Americans always knew they were there. They were not called Americans, that's all. The idea of discovery, the term discovery, the concept of discovery is itself a very clear colonial idea, which suggests right from the moment of setting foot, of seeing things for the first time, an attempt to conquer. Now, please note, I don't mean to use the word conquer in the sense of a military conquest. But what I want to point out, and that's why James Reynolds, the first official map of the Hindustan landscape is up on your screen, published in 1788, Memoir of a Map of Hindustan. I use the term dominance to not just speak in terms of a military conquest, but in terms of a conquest via knowledge or epistemological conquest. So there is William Hawkins discovering the wealth of India. John Fryer, who dissects a firefly to show the natives of the Deccan that it is not divine. The creature has a biological structure which gives off that light. To James Reynolds preparing this map. The first conquest of India and the subcontinent, we should call it subcontinent because it's not called India at that point in time, was principally a conquest achieved through knowledge. And knowledge-making and meaning-making practices demanded more than anything else documentation. A documentation that required drawings, etchings, maps. So right from the 17th century, the English were making drawings of all kinds. John Fryer, in his travelogue, published in 1688, has drawings of leaves, the leaves he saw and collected when he was traveling through India. He drew all of that. He drew the structure of the temple, what they used to call the pagodas. They drew hills, they drew landscapes. Please note, James Reynolds, 1788, is preparing the first official map of the subcontinent for the East India Company. But it's not the first map per se. It's the first official map. There were other drawings, there were other maps. For example, they listed the route to be taken from Surat to Delhi. Surat was where the ships came, and from there by road to Delhi. So they drew that route. They drew the distance in course. They documented how much time it took. So some of you may be aware of the fact that maps of the dark roads, the postal roads that the British put together and put in place are available. The Cambridge University's map room has some of those. So the map was one essential tool of discovery. But what was more important was documentation. Observers Travelers were also observers, which is why I love the title, Wanderers and Witnesses. They witnessed, they looked at it, they recorded it, and all. Now, please note here, they were prejudiced, of course they were. Which among us is not? No? All of us are prejudiced against people of a different skin color, language, those who eat a different kind of food or wear different kinds of clothes. So to say that the British were prejudiced is not saying anything. All of us are. They wrote for their time. When William Rowe was making disparaging remarks about India, he was not expecting that Pramod Nayar will speak about his comments on the Tamil Heritage Trust portal. He wrote for his time, his audience. So I'm not a big fan of presentism that we expect them to have been politically correct in the 16th century and 17th century. That's ridiculous. But what I want to emphasize is that maps were a moment of discovery. Maps were also a moment of dominance. What you begin to see here is the empire does not get built on military and political maneuvers. It gets built on knowledge. And here I'm adapting the stunning arguments made by Bernard Escon, the anthropologist of colonialism and its forms of knowledge, and built extraordinarily brilliantly by people like Chris Bailey. And of course, the person who spoke earlier this week, Thomas Troutman, talking about language, Tamil literature, and learning and school education. So when I say from discovery to dominance, they are not very distinct categories. It's not a linear chronological narrative. They are woven into each other. Please understand that. So this was James Runnell publishing his Memoir of a Map of Hindustan. It's a 600-page volume, and this was the map affixed to it. James Runnell and others were a part of the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India, which was the first major cadastral survey undertaken. Having discovered bits and pieces of the empire and putting it together, there were other kinds of interests that they wanted to indulge in. And that was the love of the exotic. India was an ancient civilization. And the time in the year in which James Runnell is publishing his Memoir of a Map of Hindustan is interesting because by then their official painter had traveled through India, William Hodges, whose paintings are there in the Calcutta Museum. And the last decades of the 18th century are crucial because of the first major political trial of the English East India Company is underway. Edmund Burke's impeachment of Warren Hastings, the first Governor General of British India, which concluded, the famous speech concluded by saying, "I impeach you in the name of humanity." That's the first time, as I'm aware, that the phrase is used. We now have, of course, crimes against humanity, which the International Court of Justice does. But it was Warren Hastings being impeached and Burke saying, "I impeach you in the name of humanity." That's the concluding part of his speech. The reason why I bring this up, the English factors, the English officials, the English traders were interested in accumulating wealth. That goes without saying. It was a trading corporation that came to India, of course, by the deed signed by Queen Elizabeth I on 31st December 1600. On the last day of the year, she signed the charter. But the interest in the exotic was also to do with not just money, but with the cultural differences that they encountered. Johann Sofani's very well-known painting from the same year as James Runnell's map. So if you want to see a contrast, here is your contrast, a map and a painting. The painting represents the British looking fascinatedly at the cockfight, but surely also betting on it. So this was the English love of the Indian exotic. Exotic, by definition, anything that comes from outside, was part of what the English set out to understand. To understand, like I said, is an epistemological conquest. The paintings by the Thomas and William Daniels, the uncle and nephew team, by William Hodges, and as we see some more of those, were attempts to capture visually, to provide a moment of discovery to the readers back home. Several of these paintings are up there in the Tate Museum, in the National Museum, in the National Portrait Gallery, and other places all over the world. But the representations were, of course, stereotypical, presenting the natives in a certain fashion. This is not a talk on the visual cultures of the Raj that we'll reserve for some other time. But the appeal of the exotic, the appeal of the different was certainly something that drove the English. So the depiction by Zofani of this cockfight also showed something else, that there was social interaction between the English rulers and their Indian subjects. By 1788, the Raj had begun to congeal around the East India Company's power. So it was underway in some sense, right? So the exotic was part of the selling of India, but it was also an index of the ways English adapted to India. They didn't adapt very well. As you can see from their clothing, the most inappropriate kind of clothing that they used to wear, tight breeches, multiple jackets. You wouldn't be seen dead wearing one of those in the Indian summer. But they weren't particularly bright about these ones, as they discovered after several years that you should not be wearing tight-fitting clothing in Indian summers. You die of the heat. But the English took some time to get used to this. So the images of visual cultures, Fanny Parks did some, Eden did some. Many of the people drew, even if they didn't do actual portraiture. So the social life was important. But there was something else also which they wanted to do. This is the painting which shows Lord Cornwallis as the victor and receiving the children of Tipu Sultan, the sons of Tipu Sultan, as hostages. Tipu Sultan dies in the Anglo-Mysore War, as we know. The first sustained resistance to the English East India Company's regime in India came from Tipu Sultan. And we do know that the sons of Tipu Sultan were incarcerated in the Vellore fort. And in 1815, there was the Vellore mutiny. But it's important to notice the benevolent expressions on the face of the English victors, the rather sad and nervous expressions on the face of the children. Some decades later, a similar benevolent Englishman would appear in a visual text showing how he has forgiven the Indians. And that would be the representation of Lord Canning forgiving the mutineer of 1857 in a cartoon which appeared in Punch, where you have the small Indian soldier and Canning sitting on a big chair with his hand on top of the head of the sepoy. And the sepoy's sword is out and there's blood dripping. And the mutineer is being forgiven by the benevolent Englishman. Why do I bring this up? I bring this up because dominance takes multiple forms. What you're seeing here is one more kind of dominance. This is late 18th century, early 19th century. The British Empire is not yet an empire. We can refer to the empire principally after 1836 when Victoria ascends the throne and the empire is in full swing. But the process is underway already. It's important to recognize the smiling, benevolent expressions on the face of the victors as a mode of dominance, because this is also the period, and a little after this, when England will seek to achieve dominance through a particular mode. And that is its great humanitarian project, or what was called the civilizational mission, which should include Christianity, the arrival of Christianity, promulgated by an Act of Parliament in 1813, but already anticipated by William Carey, who in 1780s was already declaring that it was the bounden mission of the English peoples to spread Christianity. It arrived through science, through technology, English language, of course, right? So dominance is beginning to make its appearance. And in this one, it's not war, it's not military might, it's not political conquest, but benevolence. The mission civilistres, as the French call it, or the civilizational mission, is already underway. Now that you have arrived, this is early 19th century. The Englishman is more settled, as you can see, relaxed, having a little smoke at his hookah. This is Charles Doyley's famous collection of visuals from the Raj. And there is, of course, the hookah bardar, the pipe bearer. The Englishman, please note again the costume, breeches, coat, very formally dressed. But if you watch the visual carefully, you also see paintings representing a hunt on the walls of his house. And obviously a very lavish mansion, which has Greek colonnades, columns, basically. And it's a very upmarket house, to borrow a contemporary term. And Doyley makes it very clear. This is a gentleman. This man here, unidentified who it is actually, also marks a transition. The first Englishmen in India up to, say, 1800 were called the Nabobs. And Warren Hastings was called the Prince of the Nabobs. By the early 19th century, they came to be called the Sahibs. The transition is important because it moves from discovery to dominance. What you're seeing here is actually a Sahib. And the little girls would be called the Missy Sahibs. So early 19th century, the Nabob transforms into a Sahib. Wealthy, authoritative, with power, leading a good life, drinking a little too much. That was usually the problem. And in general, being in control. So what we're looking at here is the ability of the English East India Company to move from a trading company to a governance system. Now, I do not want to go too much into the question of the company. Nicholas Thomas's book is a great one, the world's first multinational corporation, the company that changed the world. These were people who were appointed by the company to do trade, but they also did a little bit of private trade on their own and made a lot of money. But there were also people who came out as scholars. And the best example of that would be William Jones. We are told by biographers that he knew to read, write, and speak in at least 20 plus languages and had a working knowledge of another 30, a multilingual genius that William Jones was. The gentleman who begins to make sense from the late 18th and early 19th century was interested in making money, no doubts there, but interested in doing good to the people, no doubt there, willing to dominate, bully, buy, whatever it is. But by the time we see this man in Doyley's image, they are in power. There's absolutely no doubt that it is not an uncertain Englishman in India. They are here to stay. By 1813, 1815 or so, one Englishman at least would say that they expect the British Empire to last for centuries. It didn't, that we know. But Adolf Hitler also said the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. It lasted for all of 15. So the empire was being built brick by brick, bit by bit. But this does not mean that the discovery process has been entirely shut away. Another form of discovery that they made, this is late 19th century, and the object of their fascination through 400 years of British writing, the Nautch girls. The British were fascinated by the Nautch girls. They didn't know what to make of them. They couldn't distinguish between the Nautch girl and the Devdasi system, for instance. They were kind of uncertain what to call them, what to describe them as. So was it quasi-divine? Were they married to the goddesses? Were they temple dancers? And so on. That's a different debate altogether. Why am I referring to the Nautch girls? Early references to the Nautch girls go back to the 17th century. They were fascinated because they found them very exotic, obviously. There was not a little less voyeuristic, salacious pleasure in watching them, again, obviously. But there is a subtext to this. Their question was, how can we permit such things, such awful cultural practices to take place? Please note, this particular painting is 1880s, by which time sati has been banned by William Bentinck. There was a great deal of interest in managing the Indian populations, in understanding them. So this is both discovery and dominance, which is the point I'm trying to make here. And of course, the fact that you had to do something for these poor women who have been trapped in the system. So the British writings on the Nautch girls and the widows, the famous sati debates, but also female infanticide, noted the fact that this was an awful system and we need to do something about it. Okay? But that was one side. The other was to capture the street scenes. Here is a Bombay scene. Okay, you can't recognize the Bombay as anything that we know now, but this is 1885. A street scene being captured. Please note the color combination, the nature of the windows drawn on the buildings there, the people sitting. And then there is, of course, I'm always fascinated by the dog there, part and parcel of the street scene in India, and the youngish looking person on horseback. Is this discovery or dominance? It's a bit of both. It's an attempt to communicate that India is nothing like that you've ever seen. Now we come to an outright instance of the British at work, so to speak. And one of their favorite puzzles was, how do you explain cultures like Thuggy? Now, thugs were both Hindus and Muslims. They were Kali worshippers. But the British were extremely offended that within the premises, within the country, within the domain of the British in India, you could have these things going on. The thugs, as we know, and this has nothing to do with Kamal Hassan's film, the thugs, as we know, would travel with the other travelers, and in the middle of the night, they would choke them to death using a handkerchief. They throttle them to death. The first documentation of the Thuggies appears in the late 18th century, and from 1810 to 1812, it's a more or less continuous series of publications. The British said this has to stop. And the man put in charge of this was somebody called William Sleeman, who was a 2-volume work called Memoirs of the Thuggy Movement. His nickname was, in fact, Thuggy Sleeman. Sleeman also founded a department which lasted for a very long time, over a century, called the Dacoity Department. He set it up. Thuggy was a problem for the English because, sorry about that, they were a disruptive force in the overarching governance structure of the empire. And this they couldn't tolerate. They couldn't permit the fact that these groups of wandering robbers could not be tracked, could not be arrested, could not be imprisoned. So Sleeman's job was to do that. And he did an amazing job. He caught hold of the Pindaris and the thugs, made them betray their own people, got them arrested, got several of them hanged, some of them reformed, and so on. There were small localized acts against them. One was a man called Philip Meadows Taylor, who has a volume called Confessions of a Thug, which is a fictional account of thugging. But I want to emphasize the fact that the campaign against Thuggy was principally a law enforcement process of dominance. The campaign against Sati, the campaign against female infanticide, were humanitarian acts of dominance. So I'm drawing a distinction between this and the other humanitarian projects that they set out to do. Female education, female infanticide and its prohibition, Sati and its prohibition. Thuggy was a military operation, was a law enforcement operation. Another image, Hindu thugs. This is from the crucial year 1857. Drawings, Hindu thugs and poisoners. Poisoners because one of the favorite methods the thugs used was to poison the fellow travelers before killing them off. These images circulated widely. At this point, I want to mention the fact that many of these texts that we are looking at, visual and verbal, appeared in the form of books, but they also began to circulate in the periodical culture of the 19th century. So you would see it in Blackwood's Edinburgh, you saw it in Illustrated London News, you saw it in Punch, in the comic version of it, and several others. So there was a widespread knowledge about India. I'll give you one example, and it's my favorite example. So those of you who heard me before, forgive me for this. The Times London began publishing in 1785. It had a column every week called News of the War in the East Indies. It was small, and it ran the length of the paper, page 4 or 5. During the Anglo-Mysore War, every day, for years, it published lists of the people killed. One of the people killed at the siege of Seringapatam is the brother of a man we read, brother of Samuel fighting. He died of cholera, actually, but that's a different issue. So the Times carried this news item, News of the War in the East Indies, which emphasized the point I've made before, that the English public were consuming India. They were consuming India literally in the form of tea, of course, but that's a different problem, and muslin from Bengal. But they were also consuming India in the form of a veritable treasure trove of information. So these images were part of the English imagining of India. And that's what I'm also calling discovery, the English discovery of India. 1857, you cannot not talk about it, though that's not the subject of my conversation today. This is the famous Miss Wheeler defending herself against the Sipais at Kanpur. This is the, of course, notorious Bibigar incident. This is an etching which appeared in the first volumes of the mutiny at that point. And everybody else in her family is killed. But Miss Wheeler apparently defended herself, shot her prospective captors, and then jumped into the well to kill herself so that she would not be captured. That's one story. The other story is she ran away with one of her captors and lived in Kanpur for many decades afterwards. It's also the subject of an Alice Perrin novel called The Woman in the Bazaar, that Miss Wheeler survived. This is a moment of a very different kind of dominance. English womanhood that survives and triumphs in India in the most inimical, in the most awful of circumstances. Miss Wheeler thus becomes a legend. There's another person, a surgeon, who is also legendary because he was the only survivor of a 12,000 strong army that went into Afghanistan, the Anglo-Afghan wars. Everybody but one man survived. So out of the 12,000 people, one man came back. And there's a famous engraving of the surgeon sitting on a horse, drooping. Because this man was also then caught in the siege of Lucknow. He was caught in the siege at Afghanistan, then he was caught in the siege of... He survived that as well. The man has several lives. Then, of course, he went back home and he died when his horse threw him and he broke his neck. So much for valor and British courage. So Miss Wheeler. Now we come to a very different kind of dominance. And this is Britain's technological conquest of India. This is the building of a bridge. It was not done by an English painter, as you can see from the name. It's partial. The bridge is not complete yet. Why is this important? By the time we're looking at the 1860s, the Indians had been given their first railway, right? The first railway had already been initiated. But what was important is to recognize, what was important was for the British after 1857, they needed a means of transport that was very quick to get to any part of the country. So the building of the Indian railways across this, and it's one of the largest rail systems in the world, as you know, was essential not necessarily to serve the Indians, but to serve the movement of military equipment, personnel, food, and arms. So while on the one hand, you cannot dispute the fact that the arrival of the railways transformed India, it also gave a very effective tool for the mapping, the control, and the traversing of the Indian landscape. So the iconic constructions of the Indian railways, mapped by several memoirs, is important also in this particular visual. And this is a painting, again, not by an English person, but natives waiting to watch a train go by. It's the other side of discovery, the Indians discovering the power of the empire. Some of you would be aware of the fact that the British regularly conducted darbars in India, the imperial darbar, where the local kings were called and the local kings were honored, so to speak, and given a little role, and they were given a gun salute, and they were given a title like Bahadur or something. Like the darbars, the train was a method of demonstrating dominance. It's not enough to have dominance, you need a spectacle also. Look at our politicians. Nobody travels with less than 50 people in their entourage. You call them on stage, there'll be 50 people on stage. When you call one, why do you need 50? The larger the entourage, the more important you are supposedly. The British understood that very well. But here is the validation by the Indians of that. Oh, look at the train, look at the train. This very large metallic thing thundering through the countryside. In the 1860s and 70s, it was not actually thundering, it was going about to 30 kilometers per hour. But the point remains the same. And people watching, they'd come as a kind of picnic. You can see a little market setup, temporary market setup behind these people. They're dressed in their Sunday best, so to speak, to watch a train, right? That's one. And now a more obvious way of dominance, the conquest of the animal life of India, the shooting of the tigers. Please also note the name of the photographer, India's first major photographer here. And this is a typical hunting image which the English were fond of. There are also any number of hunting memoirs that I've worked on that in another context. It was not enough to have shot a tiger, you needed to document it. So there are descriptions of the length of the tiger, the ferocity of the tiger, the trouble they took to hunt the tiger. The tiger represented, they didn't hunt lions. They trapped elephants, but hunted wild boar and tigers. By the way, I do not know how they classify the animals as shootable and not shootable, but yeah. It's important to recognize that the conquest of the Indian landscape, which was done by the train, was done by the train here, by the conquest of the thugs here, by finishing the thug culture, but also by conquest over life. The animal cultures of the British Empire are a different subject altogether. They also did conservation efforts for forests, but for them, the tiger was a key figure. This is a speculation. I cannot clearly prove that this was actually true, but the tiger enters the British imagination with Tipu Sultan, who was known as the Tiger of Mysore, right? Around the same time, William Blake publishes his famous poem, The Tiger. Then William Hickey is walking through where several of my kind hosts are, Madras. He's walking along Paris at that time. And there are Indian sepoys sitting by the roadside. And he records in his memoirs, I think they made tiger eyes at me. The entire Indian landscape at one point is described as a tigerish landscape. Tiger becomes, therefore, a metaphor, a very critical term in the British lexicon, because for them, Tipu was an awesome, but also an awful monstrosity. But it was also a magnificent challenge. So the tiger remains a challenge through the 19th century, and the dominance to be asserted included conquest of this. My screen, that's all I have by way of images. There are plenty more which you could talk about. But what I want to now conclude in the couple of minutes left is to note the fact that when I say from discovery to dominance, like I said at the beginning of my talk, I am not necessarily mapping a chronological sequence. Right from the beginning, discovery was tinged with dominance. All dominance demanded a moment of discovery. So it could be the dominance via military purposes, such as we have seen in the case of Thuggees. It could be humanitarian, which would be the Nach girls, the widows, the Sati campaign. It could be in the form of education, religion, technology by all means, the coming of the railways, the roads, and so on. The English in India worked very hard at understanding, at least attempting to, the landscape, and were very often thwarted in that effort because they thought India was just not understandable. Its sheer variety, its sheer range was unbeatable and incomprehensible. And I have elsewhere argued this case that India represented a profusion and an excess. When 1857 occurs, they are shocked and they cannot imagine that these so-called docile people could rise up because they thought their dominance was complete. But as we know from critical theorists, where there is power, there is resistance. You can't expect total domination at any point. And you certainly can't expect dominance in a country as varied as India. Post 1857, the attitudes therefore change. It begins to concretize. It begins to be more discriminatory. It begins to be more authoritarian. Because the logic was, you can't be continuously benevolent to these natives. They're untrustworthy. So you have to ensure that dominance is total. So while Thuggy, humanitarian movements were a part of it, and it continued into the 19th century, it did not stop, by the way. So they had the temperance movement, they had all sorts of movements in the late 19th century. So it's not that it was, the humanitarianism was shut down, but it remains to be remembered that post 1857, many of the discourses of discovery were toned down in favor of the discourse of dominance. Thank you for your patience, and sorry if there was any technical glitch that kind of mess up my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Nayar. That was a very different kind of a lecture. using pictures to demonstrate what you wanted to talk about. A very different format and very, very entertaining. I'll now ask our Shiva Tyagarajan from THT to moderate the question answer session. Over to you, Shiva.
Thank you, Dr. Pramod Nayar, for this very enthusiastic, energetic lecture. The hour just flew by just looking at the pictures. And so I'm going to just, trying to understand a little bit of your love for the British, and, you have a couple of books, you have books on travel. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just wanted to.
No, your voice is actually breaking up.
Okay, that's what. Hold on a second. Let me just.
Well, I can
hear you very clearly. Yeah.
Okay.
Are you
Is
sure?
it better now?
No, Mr. Nayar, Dr. Nayar, is there any problem on the net on your side? Maybe can you just check?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yeah, Dr. Nayar, are you able to hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, please.
Yes, I think the headphones are losing power or something like that. So just wanted to ask you, about being a professor of, English, how it all started, talking about travel and history. How did you get into that side?
The Raj was and has remained a first love. I did my doctoral work on the British writings, British novels on India. But I discovered that many of the novels that I was reading over the years had adapted from travel literature, had adapted from cartographic writings, scientific writings. And I discovered that there was a vast body of work that influenced and informed the British opinions on India. So basically what we call in academics discourse. So there was a lot of discourse put together, multiple forms. Like I said, it's an enormous volume of work. And you can spend 100 years reading it and you'll still not exhaust it. Periodicals, magazines, all sorts of things. So my interest in that stemmed from coming to it via fiction and a little bit of poetry, but primarily this. Travel writing has always been a matter of some interest to me, and naturally because I was not really going to look at European travel writings on America or Australia. So like that. Then I did work on 1857. I did a couple of things with 1857 and the trial of Bahadur Shah Zafar and things like that. And as somebody pointed out, I'm always doing at least one Raj book among my other projects. Every year I'm doing at least one Raj book. Yeah. So I also think that things like the English language have a very strong historical connection to many of these documents, which we should be reading, which we don't actually. We are very choosy as to which historical record we want to consult. But it's important, I think, to also recognize that there is a humanitarianism which is part of the colonial heritage, which involves looking at this. But also, and you may know that Sumati Ramaswamy is now working on Pachayapas and donations. She's looking at the Pachayapa Trust and how Indians responded. She gave a talk in our department, and I know her work. She did a brilliant set of books on this. But her current project is on generosity and philanthropy in colonial Madras. And she's also making this point that the historical connections are very interesting because it also is not just English, it's also natives who are responding to it. So when I was looking at Indian travel writing in the age of empire, I noted that many of the Indians were responding to the British. So it was not just English writing about India. The Indians were writing about the British as well. For example, the travelers who went to England, they did a literary travel narrative. So when they traveled through England, when they went to the Lake District, they were able to quote Wordsworth. They went to Stratford upon Avon and they quoted Shakespeare. These are Indians writing. So it's a very messy
but still interesting domain. So I really don't see myself as separating the literary text that I'm interested in from the historical narrative.
Shiva.
Yeah, I think we lost you, Dr.
No,
Pramod.
it came through. It came through fine, Shiva, for us.
Oh,
Okay.
You're not able to see him, Shiva?
I'm not able to hear him.
Oh, I see.
Uh,
We are able to hear
in
him.
that case, I think you should continue.
Okay. See, I have one question from Ravi Shankar. He says in Discovery to Dominance, you have not talked about the Raj literature and writers. While we saw so much of their art, there were people who wrote both fiction and non-fictional writings, no? And what was their influence as far as the British understanding of India or India's understanding of themselves to a great extent?
well, that's actually a full-fledged separate talk on British literature and empire. It starts in 1780s with a novel called Hartley House. That's the first British novel about India. The people I mentioned, Philip Meadows Taylor, also wrote fiction, all the way to Paul Scott writing The Jewel in the Crown and the Raj Quartet in the 20th century. But of course, the iconic text, 100 years of it, would be E.M. Foster's A Passage to India.
Yeah.
Also a successful film.
Or John Masters also.
John Masters, who does all his the Thuggy books, the Night Runners of Bengal.
Yeah.
Other people who wrote Mutiny, and there's at least 120 novels written by British on the 1857 mutiny itself. I put together 6 of those in a collection, actually, the mutiny novels. So the literature is not something I could have also done here. You can either get the visuals or you can get the literature. We'll reserve that for a later date. But yes, there's a vast body of work there.
Okay. I have one question from Badri. What was the driving force amongst the British to document everything? Like gazetteers, paintings, memoirs, news articles, photos, on and on and on. It moved to language documentation, grammar works, Edgar Thurston's work like Caste and Tribes of India. What exactly were they trying to do? I mean, did they really plan from the beginning that they were going to be here for a long time? So they needed all this documentation?
No, I'm not sure that when people like William Hawkins are writing about this, or Thomas Roe is writing about his experience in India, he's thinking in terms of a long-term conquest. In the late 19th and early 20th century, the English historian John Seeley, the Cambridge History Library is the Seeley Library even today, said the British Empire was acquired in a fit of absence of mind. You know, it was not planned. I'm sorry, somebody else speaking? Or
No.
okay.
No. A little bit of internet problems only, mostly at your end, but it's okay. Please proceed as it is.
Okay. So the British were documenting things that they saw for the consumption of people back home. I'm not sure that the early writings are infused with a sense of the imperial. Discovery, yes. Shock, definitely. Pleasure, yes. So it was not necessarily a political act of documenting that I see in the writings that I'm aware of from 1579, that is Thomas Stevens' letter from his ship to India. They were interested in trade, so they documented our currency systems, our road systems, what sells, what doesn't sell. For example, Ralph Fitch, whom Gauri also mentioned in her introductory remarks, is traveling through Belgaum, what is today's Belgaum, and he's transfixed to the spot because, as he puts it, precious stones were being sold on the pavements. What is this, he said. I mean, people are selling rubies and diamonds like they are selling vegetables. And Ralph Fitch is writing in 1583, as I remember it. So at that point, the agenda is trade, not conquest, but trade. So knowledge preceding trade, knowledge then preceding governance. That's how I would divide it.
Okay. One question by Chakravarti Bharati. The accounts of the early English travelers to India Did they in any way influence the 19th century English literature?
No, it influenced the influence on the 19th century literature comes from a little around the middle 18th century. That is the description of the Nautch girls, the description of the wealth of India, and so on. By the time we get to the late 18th century, you have Percy Shelley and a whole bunch of English romantic writers who are reading, consuming, and producing materials about India. Nigel Leask has his lovely book from the early 90s, which talks about it, English romantic writers and the East, Anxieties of Empire. So by the 1780s, English literature is definitely responding to the India materials. I would date it to the late 18th.
Ramesh Gauri Raghavan asks, he says he asked the same question yesterday too. What can you say about Emily Eden and Mary Frere? They share surnames with officials who are part of the dominance narrative, but would you count them as discovery?
Oh yes, they still remain discoverers. They came to India and they moved in an entourage facilitated by their wealthier family members, like Lord Auckland's sister traveling through India and things like that. I would think of Fanny Parks, also traveling through India in 1850s, as still embarking on a voyage of discovery. And I have a very specific angle to this. They were not women in power. One of the ways in which they could assert agency was by documenting what they wrote as witnesses. It was a little bit of reclaiming social prestige and public visibility through their narratives as though they are independent observers. Oh, I am not, I'm not just X's wife or Y's sister. Here I am a writer in my own right, so to speak. So you have Fanny Parks, you have Emily Eden, you have so many of those late 18th to 19th. So, for example, there's somebody traveling in 1777, publishes a work in 1777 called Jemima Kindersley. She travels through India to various other parts of the world. And she's at Allahabad, and she's in Allahabad in winter. And all of them are muffled in shawls. The Indians are all huddled like that. And she looks at them and says, see these people. I'm very suspicious of them. Why are they all? Now, this is discovery, yes, but it's also a fine-tuned observation. English women travelers to India were claiming a public space with their writings, because otherwise they will just be add-ons to their husbands, boyfriends, captains in the army, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this also brings me to another question. I think somebody else has also asked, were any of these writings or paintings commissioned, or were they all taken up of their own volition? Because they were here.
Several were commissioned. Thomas and William Daniels, the Daniel uncle-nephew team commissioned. Hodges commissioned. So they were commissioned, yes. So they were, so it becomes a part of the imperial archive collection to commission.
So the British government commissioned it?
Yes. In several cases they did. But what the women sketched did not get commissioned. They put it in their manuscripts. They put it there. So that's it, which is why I said it's a reclamation of a public space.
Yeah,
you're not going to commission me. I'm only a woman traveler. Hey, but I can still write, but I can still draw, and here it is. So Fanny Parks' Wanderings of a Pilgrim in Search of the Picture as 1853, 2-volume work. Very detailed descriptions, very beautiful descriptions. She's in a carriage, for example, being transported in a large carriage, being transported somewhere, and she wonders why half of the carriage has a curtain. She doesn't know why she's given only half a carriage. So she quietly lifts the curtain and discovers behind the curtain is a cage with a large tiger in it. And she puts the curtain back and says, what? Why am I traveling with a tiger? And she makes a big fuss about it. That, this is not the way to treat an English lady. How can you put her in the same carriage with a tiger? So many of those. So when the English woman is writing, she's aware of the fact that she will only be treated as, oh, one more domestic writer. So Fanny Parks, for instance, pays attention to the local Ranis, writes about them to show that she also has a political mind. She's astute. So she writes about princesses, She writes about the upbringing. She writes about education. And she says, hey, look, I'm as wise as you are, even though I have no official standing.
Shiva, if you're able to hear, you can ask a few questions.
Yeah.
I'll give one more example on this, and that would be Sarah Tucker's 2-volume work, Travels in South India. Sarah Tucker is the founder of the Tucker school system. It still runs. She has 2 volumes on South India.
Tirunelveli area, you have
Yes, the
schools.
Tucker schools.
Yeah.
So she has 2 volumes on South India. And if you read that, you will see how astute an observer she is. For example, she notes upper class Indians will not send their girl children to a school where they have to sit next to boys. So she says, I don't endorse this, but we might have to have girls' schools because that's the only way you can give them an education.
Is it also true that women were perhaps more observant than men because men had other issues to think about, maybe either in terms of trade or governance or whatever? Women were just there to observe.
Judgment that I'm hesitant to pass because the men also had a very different agenda, what they were observing.
Yeah.
The women, for example, were given access to the women's quarters. Chandragupta Nayar has brilliant stuff on Behind the Zenana. The JNU academic has stuff on, Antoinette Burton has. So they were given access to the women's quarters, which they could then write about. They talked to the princesses, they talked to the queens. So Sarah Tucker, to go back to my example, noted that there is a very clear caste, class, religion divide for Indians to send their children to school. So she said, we will have a problem. The upper class Indians will worry about Muslim children, boy children. No, they will not send their children. And of course, the lower quote unquote caste, lower caste children. So she said, I don't like it, but we might just have to run it on different schedules. So imagine this is Sarah Tucker writing in the mid 19th century. Alert to the social nuances, the social fabric of the society, which she then wanted to serve. So when the first medical college for women was set up, Lady Hardinge College, it was inaugurated by the Governor General Hardinge. But his wife also gives a speech where she says, women must also have access to higher education. How can you say that education is for men? So she's already making, and please note, this is also the time of the suffragette movement in England. So they're influenced by that. But Lady Hardinge's wife will get a hearing because she's the wife of the viceroy. But Sarah Tucker is just no one. Irene Barnes, who comes out as a doctor, said, the biggest problem here is the women are not getting educated. We should do something about it. So that emphatic reasoning is just brilliant.
Shiva?
Yes. Do we have a book by Thomas Rowe or William Hawkins?
No, we don't have a book by Hawkins. Hawkins appears in Samuel Purchas's volume, Purchas His Pilgrim, 1625. Thomas Rowe has a book. The Embassy of Sir Thomas Rowe to India. Munshi Ram Manohar Lal has an edition, 1985. Yeah, it's about 450 pages.
Thank you so much.
Anurag Kaund, you can.
Yes, it's very interesting, when you look at these the talk that you have taken us through. Tigers and elephants, naturally, they would figure out in these discoverers' side. But Nautch girls and thugs are something that you don't expect. And so I have a question on that. Did they do anything further? I know you mentioned about the social reform that kind of goes along with looking at, portraying Nautch girls and taking it to somebody's attention. Did they actually have any reform after that on that?
Oh, they did. They enacted legislation. But the biggest one was not this. The biggest one occurs in the last decades of the 19th century, and that is the age of consent. Raising the marriageable age for women was a big debate. There is an 11-volume set on the age of consent debates. The Teen Murthy Library in Delhi has the full set So I've reproduced part of it in my work on British women in India. So what they did was they sent out a questionnaire to hundreds of people around the country, Indians and English. They sent it to nurses, doctors, educators. They sent it to Indian priests, Muslim, Hindu, Brahmin, non-Brahmin, a wide variety. And the questionnaire is about 27 questions, as I recall it, but I'm not 100% sure. And using that, they made a compilation, 11 volumes, and that is how they passed the age of consent bill. So that was one of the few examples where they took information from the subjects, colonial subjects, to do the legislation. It was initiated by William Bentinck, who, before he banned sati, he called a meeting of various munshis, pradhans, Muslim Maulvis and all that, and asked them for their opinion. And the debate, the House of Commons has a series, the parliamentary debates on sati. It's available, the Hansard debates, where he said, hey, look, I do not want to do anything which will be against your shastras. You please tell me. So he called all these pundits to debate on whether sati is permitted or not as per the shastras. So these reforms were not always enacted in a vacuum. They did a little bit of what is now called public consultation. You know, when the UGC wants to do something, they put out their draft notification first and ask for public feedback. Then anyway, they go and do whatever they want to do.
Okay, Anurag Kaud wants to know, 1 minute, was the discovery as dominance a unique British trait or a universal European manner? Did anybody else also use this discovery and dominance technique that you talked about today?
They did it in varied forms. For example, the conquest of Africa by the Dutch, the French, was not so much about humanitarian one as much as military conquest. Because the fundamental difference is when they did their discovery, European discovery of, say, I'll take Africa as an example, they said, oh my God, what a primitive people they are. What do? Well, we beat them into submission and then we will give them religion. They couldn't do that to India because when they came to India, India was already an established civilization. They could not have come as conquerors. They came as traders, asking for favors. That's why the first documentation is the request for a farman from Jahangir, saying, can you please give us trading rights? Then they said, we want some land rights, etc., etc. But in the case of Africa, in the case of South America as well, there was a discovery narrative, Livingstone and the famous discoverers, that is there. But the primary difference, as I can see it, is that stemmed from military might. In India, it was not the case. In India, the military interventions happened nearly 150 years later, Plassey and Buxar. But in the other cases, no. So I would think that's a huge distinction.
Soma Ghosh wants to know, did any of the Indian princely states, through the British, did they also get some documentation done for their own extent of the empire or whatever, or their culture, whatever?
They did. Ian Copeland has a book, the British, the Princely Raj, who talks about it. Hi, Soma, by the way. Those of you who don't know, Soma is the librarian of the Salarjung Museum here.
Oh.
And a fantastic scholar in the field. But yeah, so they did. The thing is, there was a question of language. They needed translations. So they couldn't always work with English. So they needed Urdu, Arabic, Sanskrit, Hindi, Hindustani to work with. So they did get some documentation done. The reliability of it, I can't vouch for because I don't work in that field. I don't also work in translation, so I can't be sure. But other interesting things that also happened at the same time, and Shankara Nayar of, I think, Harvard has a book 2 years ago from University of California Press, where, for example, the first translations of the Yoga Sutras were commissioned by Muslim rulers in the Mughal Empire. That's the interesting part when you want to think of pluralistic traditions. They wanted the Yoga Sutras translated into Arabic. For that, they wanted money. They approached the East India Company. They did various things to get hold of that textual apparatus. So there's always a lot of back and forth that goes on. Yeah, Soma knows about it anyway. Yeah.
The V.K. Srinivasan wants to know, compiling the names of all these travelers which you've mentioned in this lecture, along with their notable observations in a few slides, will be highly helpful. I mean, is such a document available with you, which can be uploaded, or can it be prepared through the course?
I have to upload a bibliography of my books, which will give you about 300 names.
Okay. 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 Yeah. Shiva?
I think that's all the questions we have from our side and the audience.
Yeah. I think
Thank
so.
you so much, Dr. Pramod Nayar, for delivering a wonderful lecture. And with that, Gauri, would you like to conclude the Indology Festival?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Nayar. That was really very nice, wonderful. And
Thank you.
Now we move on to the...
Bye.
Bye. Just 1 minute. That brings to an end our 6-day-long Indology Festival. Thank you for being part of this thoughtful journey through time, text, and the many Indias seen through foreign eyes. One second. Okay. One's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things, said Henry Miller. These words remind us that the essence of travel lies not merely in geography, but in transformation, in how we learn to see, think, and understand differently, and sometimes influence the lands we visit. Over these past days, we have journeyed through time with travelers who, though separated by centuries and purposes, all shared a common curiosity about India. They each added a thread to the rich tapestry of India's global encounters. These voices, however partial or personal, offer us more than just records of the past. They challenge us to question how cultures perceive one another, how narratives shape identity, and how observation is always shaped by the observer. Now it's time to give our vote of thanks. One second. First, to our guiding forces, Professor S. Swaminathan, co-founder of THT and a pillar of support and encouragement to all our activities and initiatives. He attends all our programs, watches all our events, and gives us on-the-spot feedback immediately. Thank you so much, sir. We are blessed to have you in our lives. And Dr. V.S. Ramachandran, Director, Center for Brain and Cognition, UCSD, for planting the idea of the Indology Festival to THT almost 5 years back. We are extremely happy that we have concluded the 5th edition of our Indology Festival today. Then, of course, to all our speakers, Professor Troutman, Dr. Venus Jain, Riddhi Joshi, Max T, Akshay Chavan, Namit Arora, Ramesh Raghavan, Faith Beasley, Dr. Kurush Dalal, Jennifer Hose, and Dr. Pramod Nayar today. They all literally flew from different corners of the world with their research, scholarship, and passion, and gave us a memorable event for 6 days through their passionate and insightful and brilliant lectures. Thanks also to the 2 speakers who almost made it but didn't, Dr. Chitra Madhavan and Dr. Naomi Verdon. We hope to hear you on another day soon. Then, of course, thanks to our Q&A moderators, associates of THT for a long time, Rangaratnam Gopu, Rajagopal V, Ashwin Prabhu, Dr. Shivram, and Shiva Tyagarajan today. Special thanks are also due to Ramesh Raghavan for associating with me throughout. Ever since the idea of this program came, he has been always around, suggesting travelers, suggesting speakers' names, propping up my morale whenever it was down, and most important, preponing his talk by 2 days at such a short notice to fill a vacant slot. Thank you, Ramesh. And Riddhi Joshi for preparing a wonderful talk on Biruni in the short span of 2 days and delivering it with such elan. Thank you, Riddhi. You're really a friend of THT. and of course the THT team, Shyam C. Raman, our program director, under whose umbrella this entire event was visualized and executed, Ravi Shankar Tyagarajan for all the logistics and back-end coordination, VSS for these wonderful posters and flyers, including the corrections right up to the last day, Badri Seshadri, our technical coordinator, not just of this event, but all our online events all the time on THT, Kishore Mahadevan for social media, and me, Gauri, who's the curator of this event and your MC for the last week. Before concluding, all I would like to say is, this seminar has been not only an exploration of external journeys, but an invitation to internal ones as well, to look again at India through the lenses of those who came before us and to reflect on what their writings say about them, about us, and about the enduring dialogue between cultures. And last but not the least, thank you to all our audience who traveled in this journey with us through the last 6 days, showing tremendous patience, incentive, and excitement to attend these talks and listen to them. Thank you very much. And a gentle reminder, for all those who missed any of these talks, either in part or in full, they are available at our YouTube channel. You may view them in leisure and give us your feedback and comments. We hope to see you in our next month's monthly talk on the first Saturday of July. With that, good night to all of you. Thank you once again. Goodbye.